we have a retrieved Reformation by O. Henry, and this would be another story published in the early 1900s. So we meet our protagonist here, Jimmy Valentine, and he has been given a pardon, which would be when a governor or president can say someone can leave prison, basically. And so he's getting out of prison. He was assiduously stitching uppers. Uppers would be the tops of a shoe because he was working in this prison shop. So carefully stitching the tops of shoes at a prison shop. And he's let out. And we immediately also get this idea, the tone of sarcasm, because it's going to tell us he's not a bad fellow at heart. Stop cracking safes and live straight. But Jimmy, he claims he's never cracked a safe in his life. We technically don't know if this is true or not. We also have some characterization of Jimmy here. The guard says he's not a bad guy, and he is going to give his quarter. He tosses his quarter into the head of a blind man. So that could tell us, even though he is a criminal, he still seems to have empathy for people. And then, of course, he gets to his old stomping ground where he was living with his friend who had gotten the helped assist getting the pardon. And he has all of his tools here, his safe cracking tools. And then when he comes out dressed like this guy, the New York Alabama short snap biscuit cracker, we can assume that this is how Jimmy gets into places to see where the safe is. Maybe he pretends to be a salesman of some sort. Then a string of burglaries, and we meet our antagonist here, who is going to be Ben Price. That was also when we actually met Ben Price before, and he's going to say Ben Price's blue collar shirt was eminent, meaning like that's sitting right there, and eminent would mean successful detective. So he would be that's going to be our antagonist. He is the person on the lookout for Jimmy. He arrested him the first time. That could also be some foreshadowing. And then that's Jim Dandy's autograph. We know autograph is a signature, so this is going to be figurative language. This would be a metaphor, or you could even say an idiom. If somebody does a crime, you would say that's their autograph, or a metaphor, because it's not his autograph, it's just how he robs safes. Then we have Jimmy going on the run, and he ends up in this small town. And ironically, he sees this bank. And we could also say more irony, isn't that Lady Polly Simpson? So he's asking some kid about the town he just got to. This would be an illusion because she was an actual person, like a celebrity back in those times. She is the banker's daughter. So you could say it's ironic that he falls in love with the banker's daughter, considering he robs safes. And then he's going to set up at this in this town, and he starts to ask about businesses, and he decides on a shoe business. Then we have another important reference here, a phoenix. Phoenixes are Greek mythology. They would symbolize rebirth. So we might be able to believe that Jimmy has actually came up and changed his life here. Remember, the story is called A Retrieved Reformation. So is it possible Jimmy has reformed? Well, now he's going to marry the girl. And then he gets a letter, and he tells his friend that he's going to retire from the business, never rob again. And he also says he wants to move out west because he's afraid of old scores being brought up against him. So that could either be the police coming to find him, or people from his past life maybe walking up to him and saying, "Hi, Jimmy," and his wife isn't going to know that his name used to be Jimmy. And then, coincidentally, you could say that Ben Price was watching the mail, and he was found out. Maybe he was kept keeping track of this letterbox, or when Jimmy's name went through the mail system, it flags him. But now Ben Price is in the town, and so we have Jimmy. He has his suitcase because he plans to go home or to his old friend to drop off his suitcase of burglar tools. So he goes to his future father-in-law's bank with his burglar tools. And when his wife, his future wife, asking, it feels like bricks. He says nickel-plated shoehorns. Obviously, he's lying because Jimmy is a liar. And as the dad is showing him the safe, it is a time lock safe. So these would be like old timey safes that would only open if it was at a certain time to prevent like a robber from like threatening the person of the bank teller. But they don't use these anymore because we could probably assume that maybe something like what's about to happen happened in this as well. So, because now we have the little girl locking herself in the safe. And here we had shut the vault, had shut Agatha in the vault. And now the family is totally upset. They are panicking. More irony. This is irony from the future father-in-law. There isn't a man near the Little Rock who can open that door. We all know that Jimmy Valentine's standing there with his suitcase full of burglar tools. And so at this point, his fiance asks if there's anything he can do. When he takes her rose, we can assume this is symbolism because he believes he's never going to see her again. Because after this, they're either going to call the police or he's just going to leave. And then, of course, he opens the safe faster than he'd ever have, breaking his own burglarious burglar record. And when we have Ralph calling, that could be he feels like he cannot be Ralph ever again. But then you have Ben. And here Jimmy's saying, got around to it last. Well, let's go. I don't know, I don't know that makes much difference now. And then Ben is going to say, don't believe I recognize you. So that would be our ending. Very ironic. And if we go to the questions that are at the bottom, all right, so here would be some of our questions. How does Jimmy's pardon in the exposition foreshadow the story's resolution? We could say, and you would just want to restate your question here. Jimmy's pardon in the exposition foreshadows the resolution because he is unofficially pardoned by Ben Price. So we could say Jimmy being let out of prison early shows that he is, and I'll just make like a theme or assumption here, that he is a resilient character that will most likely be able to find his way out of any sort of trouble. So we can assume that if he's getting let out of prison in the beginning, he's probably going to be not end up in prison in the end. And you could really answer this type of question however you want to. It foreshadows that he is able to stay out of prison. It foreshadows that he will have some type of luck in the end, because you could say Ben Price gives him this like remorse. He's someone who is capable of being redeemed or capable of reforming. Anything you want to say for this. And then, why is this story titled A Retrieved Reformation? The story is titled A Retrieved Reformation because Ben Price, you could say, went to Elwood to retrieve or arrest Jimmy for his past crimes. When Ben gets to Elwood, he observes Jimmy's new life and witnesses him use his safe-breaking skills to save his fiance's niece. Rather than retrieving Jimmy the criminal, he retrieves the information that Jimmy has reformed, hence a retrieved reformation. We can also maybe say here that Ben Price kind of reformed in a way too, because he was dead set on arresting Jimmy. He did not believe that he could change. So in a way, maybe we can also say that Ben Price reformed because he realized that people are capable of change. So you could really have multiple answers for this one. These are interpretation questions. And then we would have, this one I would want to know. Do you think Jimmy will return to his life with Annabelle? Why or why not? Use textual evidence to support your response. I think he will, because he had taken her rose to remember her by, which shows he loved her very much. And now that Jimmy no longer has to worry about the police finding him, he can continue his life as Ralph Spencer. It is also likely that Jimmy can formulate some kind of lie to explain maybe why his suitcase had burglar tools. And then Annabelle and her family, they're going to be way more likely to believe him probably because he just saved the niece. You could also say here, maybe he tells the truth. That could be another one. That he just comes straight out clean with them because he saved the niece. He did get forgiven by the police. And we could maybe also assume that now he doesn't even feel like he has to go out west anymore because the police will no longer be looking for him. And as long as he doesn't commit any more crimes, which he seems genuinely like he won't, then that would be another possible answer. Or maybe you think he just doesn't want to. Maybe you could also assume maybe that because Annabelle's parents, and this is where you'd use your textual evidence, you could also say you don't think they'll get back together because once Annabelle's dad finds out her daughter was about to marry a burglar, there would just be no turnaround. So you could have either or, whatever you think for this question here. And then this would be your chart. So our setting, our narration, we're going to have third person narration, the point of view of Jimmy Valentine. And then our setting, we had two, well, technically, we could just say early 1900s for your time period, because that's important. We're not in the day of like modern policing. They didn't have like really fingerprints or cameras or anything like that. So I kind of made Jimmy it easier for him to do all this. And we could say it started in a city. We could say begins in a city, then switches to a small town when Jimmy goes on the run. You could also actually say it begins in a prison, but the prison was somewhere in a city, you could assume. So then we have protagonist Jimmy Valentine. And for characterization, I'm going to say he does show kindness. I would also put in there his line when he says he was well, the fact that he tells the warden he's never robbed a safe. And then, so you could say he's kind, but manipulative. Um, you could also say maybe, like, if he got out of prison, somebody maybe that likes to do things the easy way at first, because he did get out of prison and just immediately start robbing. But then when he has to go on the run, he immediately was able to open a business. So it's almost like he didn't really need to do the robbing, but I guess he kind of did because he needed some money to get started. So I don't know. That's however you want to characterize him with some textual evidence. And we have Ben Price. We could say he is dedicated dedicated to his work, intelligent because he hunted Jimmy down, and then we could say forgiving because he lets Jimmy go at the end after realizing he reformed. So we could say forgiving, merciful if you want to go that far. This would definitely have sarcastic, dark humor. You kind of have Jimmy, you have the clerk handing him, and Jimmy saying, "Oh yeah, I'm going to rehabilitate myself and be prosperous with this." So you could say a dark kind of humor, sarcastic tone, and also the fact that we're kind of rooting for Jimmy the bank robber here. So then you have Jimmy versus himself. Jimmy has to decide whether to reveal his past life to his fiance or let his niece die. So that was our climax there, where he has to make that decision. Then we obviously have Jimmy returns to his life of crime, and Ben has to go on the hunt to re-arrest him. So that would be character versus character, Jimmy versus Ben. You could maybe say character versus fate, destiny. Jimmy has to decide if he's going to turn his life around or continue his life of robbery. Then you have themes. You have this idea of can a person change? You could say forgiveness versus punishment. Another theme could be criminal. You could say like the criminal justice system in general. The lack of proper rehabilitation programs for prisoners, because he's in there sewing shoes together. You could maybe say it's like this story is just maybe a criticism of people being set up for failure, right? And then you could have choices. You could have a life of crime versus a steady income and family, something like that. And then also you could say something about definitely the forgiveness versus punishment. You could say like the theme of reformation versus uh, being stagnant or not changing, anything like those. And then for your symbolism, the phoenix symbolizes rebirth. And then we would have Ralph and Annabelle, the rose, it symbolizes his love for her, and he believes after he does this, he will never see her again. So those could be some symbols there. You could also say the burglar tools for this. The burglar tools, they recur throughout the theme, show, we could say, Jimmy's reluctance to leave his life of crime behind. So throughout the story, the burglar tools are coming up. Also, maybe Jimmy's lying. That could be a motif. Like, is Jimmy ever going, do you really ever truly change? He might not be breaking laws anymore, but we could assume he's still going to be the same sarcastic kind of person. And then you would have foreshadowing when Jimmy receives his pardon. Then this one that could foreshadow ending when it said, "You're not a bad fellow at heart." The warden telling this to Jimmy. Jimmy foreshadows that he will someday become an upstanding citizen. In fact, you could say he became a hero, right? Because he saved this girl. You could also say the thing when he throws the quarter. When Jimmy throws a quarter to the blind man, it foreshadows he is empathetic towards others and could, well, I don't want to say end up saving a life but it does foreshadow that he saves this little girl. We know that he has empathy for people. He is going to help people when he can. So we could say this foreshadows how he will inevitably help save is a little girl's life. I forget. A little girl's life. However you wanted to write that. So ironic. It is ironic when May locks herself in the vault, or when the girl gets locked in the vault. And Mr. Adams states, I might fix this. It is ironic when May is locked in the vault. Is locked. Wait. When May is locked in the vault, and Mr. Adams states, there's a man in Little Rock who can open that door. This is ironic because the reader knows that Jimmy Valentine is literally the only person who can open the vault. Then you have your exposition. Jimmy uses prison with pardon. The warden warns him not to keep burglarizing safes. Jimmy receives $5. He returns to his old life. A police detective, Ben Price, vows to send him back. Jimmy moves to a small town, falls in love with the banker's daughter, opens a shoe store by the name of Ralph Spencer, informs his old friend he will be returning to give him a set of burglar tools. This letter is intercepted by Ben Price, who arrives to the small town, to arrest Jimmy. Then you could say, while at his future father-in-law's bank, Jimmy's his niece, because we could say Annabelle's niece locks herself in the vault. Well, is locked in the vault. Niece is locked in the vault. And then this here is where we have our climax. Jimmy must decide whether or not to expose his past life and open this vault with his burglar tools. And then we could say he takes Annabelle's rose to remember her and opens the vault in 10 minutes. Actually, you could say too that Ben Price is there. I might say, while his father-in-law's bank, Annabelle's Price is locked in the vault. This all occurs while Ben Price is watching, because he entered the bank, he followed them. So that would be the climax. And then here you could say, the climax, the falling action and the resolution go very quickly here, right? So here we could say Ben Price says he does not know Jimmy Valentine and points him to the direction of his buggy. That'd be like a cat back then. So then the falling action, we could say Jimmy walks away from his fiance and his family as they call his name. He bumps directly into Ben Price, who is waiting for him. He tells Ben Price that he might as well take him back to prison. And then that would be your falling action. Or the resolution would be that very final line where Ben Price says, I don't know you, and then he walks away. And then for these would be our figurative language. That's Dandy Jim's autograph. That could be a metaphor or an idiom. I'll put that in there. Could also apply as an idiom, a commonly used phrase of the time period. You could still say they use this phrase now too. Then this one, another metaphor that symbolizes that he actually did change, we could say. And then Polly Simpson, that's going to be an illusion. And then any of these, you could come up with a lot of different central ideas. It shows how people are capable of reinventing themselves for the better if the authorities are willing to provide second chances. You could also say it shows if someone does a heroic deed, it shows that they're worthy of forgiveness. Well, sometimes, like, maybe it depends, but for a central idea statement, you could say being selfless is because he does fall in love. You could make one about love too. You could say that falling in love with someone, with the right person, has the ability to change someone. Because he fell in love with Annabelle, and then now he's this new man. We don't know if it was Annabelle. We could actually maybe assume that if he didn't meet Annabelle, he might not have changed so much. So you could definitely also have a central idea, something about love and purpose. He also had this business too. So he had a family connection because he was pretty much part of Annabelle's whole family. So any of those could be possible central ideas for a retrieved Reformation.